Welcome to the Dr. G Show. This is episode 188. So tonight we're going to talk about anxiety, and our next week we'll talk about anxiety also. So the next 2 weeks after that we'll do on depression. And so this is a pretty big topic. I know we've covered it a couple times before over the last 5 years, but certainly due for a refresher course. And I went ahead and I pulled some new data and kind of like rearranged this versus what I usually do for this talk. And then also extended it so we can really kind of get into some more details too. So last week we had finished with kind of healthy boundaries and resiliency, and we had Suzanne on there as our guest, and so that went really well. And there's still so much to all that we haven't talked about. Some of that then bleeds over to things like anxiety and depression when we don't have healthy boundaries. And so a lot of times we kind of feel like we're a victim in a situation because of our own kind of internal dialogue that we have. So we want to talk about with anxiety, kind of really explaining kind of why we have it, and kind of like working through some details of like eliminating some pretty typical concepts for anxiety and how it's treated. So if you guys have this, by no means, as we go through this, whatever you do, if it works for you right now, that's perfectly fine, right? There's no shame in taking medication. There's no shame in anything, and there certainly isn't any shame in getting therapy because everybody needs therapy. Uh, that like was one of the big chunks that in the last, or 5 6 years ago, that really allowed me to kind of have a better understanding of me and kind of why I was making the decisions that I was just making, and really kind of finding that value. And then mindfulness set in, and did yoga, meditation, and holy crap, everything changed. So we all end up in this kind of situation as Americans where we're really just kind of coping and getting by, and we feel stable, and then eventually there's a price to pay and you can't maintain anymore. So the age part is kind of interesting, which we'll talk about. So when we look at anxiety, so I'm not going to tell you what anxiety is. If you have anxiety, you know what anxiety is, right? Um, and for most people, the treatment tends to not last for very long, or it just gets worse and worse and worse, and then the meds get more and more meds with that. So we want to eliminate a few things and some general concepts. Typically, the way that I always practice is functional lifestyle medicine. And so, if you've watched my show for the last 5 years, I mean, it is just minutia of detail and very practical things. Most of things like even happiness is not rocket science. It's simply a matter of understanding how the body works, what we do to mess it up, and how to stop messing it up. And you'll hear me all the time say this is an American kind of phenomenon. Like, we create this stuff. So let's take a look at a few things here. So if you don't know, America is the #1 country for anxiety and depression. Now, I say that all the time. I went ahead and looked it up just to make sure, and I was just like, sometimes I say stats all the time, and I start to think like, is this real, or did I just make this up, or did I hear it somewhere else, and maybe I kind of like adapted a little bit, but it's true. So it's still true. So if you look at this chart here, we got a few graphs. I love my graphs, but this is, we gotta go backwards, America. That's the prevalence of anxiety and depression, or sorry, anxiety. Now, the darker one in there is women, and the lighter one is male. So you can see that there's a difference of that. So in something like anxiety, we tend to see more women than men, but probably about the same. It's just men probably don't always have the right verbiage to explain how they feel, and they cope a lot with stuff, so they don't have to address those feelings, right? Where women tend to be more in tune with who they are. They tend to be overthinkers anyways. Maybe, I don't know. That seems sexist. But in my experience. And so if they're going to know if something's wrong, they're going to know, and they're going to really spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. So women are more likely. I mean, 85% of healthcare is women, because women actually want to get better and they want to feel better, and men don't always, unless their junk's not working, they really don't care, right? So they're not going to get help. So that's probably the difference of those two numbers. But America is not only the most anxious country in the world, but by far. I mean, look how far it is compared to all the other ones. So the next country, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, what do you guys think? I know in Europe, I think it's France, but France on this one is right here. So the next major country is China. And so, of course, with their regime and all this kind of stuff, not a big surprise. Um, then Brazil, and they have a lot of poverty and crime going on there. India, same kind of thing. Probably, I mean, most of these are like way overpopulated. Then Germany, then the United Kingdom, then Mexico, France, Italy, Russia. Okay, get the Russians are less anxious than Americans. That's insane. And then South African, Spanish, Japanese, South Korea, Australia, and Canada. Now, when we get to depression, I believe that where Australia is like tiny amount for anxiety, it's pretty significant. It's right there with America for depression. So, and I think the same thing for like depression medications. So when we look at this and we say America's depressed, America's anxious, when we talk about these concepts, these are really American kind of phenomenons, right? So when you look at the world's healthiest, happiest, longest living populations, it really is not rocket science to why they are so happy, right? It is not stress. We will talk about this over and over. It is not stress that makes or breaks you, right? Years ago, like I was just like everybody else. I coped really well. I was really happy, and I grew up pretty hard and lots of exposure to violence and abuse, and I saw and heard and felt horrific things. And so, but I found my kind of like, happiness in that. And so, I could cope. And so that kind of happiness to where I am now, that's a totally different place. People that are like, in America, we just kind of like, well, everybody has this, everybody's falling apart. So let's teach people how to live with it. Let's teach people how to cope with it. But what we want to do differently is really try to get people to become different so that they aren't anxiety anymore. Even like Dale Carnegie, who wrote a book in the 1930s called How to, was it, Stop Worrying, Start Living? He said 80% of what you worry about will never ever happen. So for people that are fixated on the anxiety, are we causing that anxiety with the kind of like adaptation theory by which we live in? So we should talk about that. Yeah. So in America, so since this is like a huge American phenomenon, one thing that's very different about America is this adaptation theory. So Americans love to live through fear and inadequacy. And we love promoting and embracing these concepts that drive fear, that drive anxiety, because people will buy stuff to try to feel safer and try to be happier. There is never a person that like bought a new lock for their front door and suddenly is just like, oh man, everything's safe now, I'm cool, right? So we drive this through Americans because it sells. The whole reason that our media is constantly fear and anger and disappointment and negativity is because it will make you stay paying attention to them, and they will make more ad revenue. So things like stranger danger, COVID, terrorism, these kind of concepts drive our negativity and our anxiety. But in America, you're more likely to get killed by your own toddler with your own handgun in your own home than killed by a terrorist. You're more likely to, well, get struck by lightning than have your kids molested by some dude in a van, right? So those kind of things that change an entire nation to constantly be anxious about everything, it costs you your hormones, it costs you your happiness, it costs you your quality of life. And so a lot of people in other countries, they look at Americans and go like, why are they so angry and fear-based? That's what we do. But we don't have to be that person in this society. As you guys have questions, feel free to post those. Let me see. Make a little adjustment here. Okay. So the other thing is, well, maybe it's genetic, right? Maybe genetics just does not like Americans. So, the countries that we came from, apparently they're happier, but somehow our American genetics changed. So if that's true, then we look at prevalence by decade, and we notice that, of course, that it goes up and up and up and up, like that. So, of course, we back off to like the 1900s or way back. We can see that anxiety has constantly been an issue, but it is now getting worse and worse, right? I can tell you, like, hey, there's a data. I can tell you that research just came out last year, like for COVID, for the anxiety of COVID, right? We say you're all going to die, you're all going to die, you're all going to die, and you can just wear anything on your mask and it's fine, right? Just wear a scarf. It's just the world's deadliest virus, right? But 99.64% of people will survive, and that's what the rates are for every other country that has been through this already. Before it even approached us, we already knew these stats. But we tell people this, and we drive that constant fear, but what's the reality? What's the disconnect there? So in Kansas, when this first started in 2020, by summer, more people were committing suicide than dying from COVID. More people killed themselves than died from COVID, right? And so all that isolation, all that panicking every day, right? If you guys were around in 2000, what was it? 2001, when the Twin Towers went down, there was a little color code wheel. Man, they were spinning that wheel. They'd be like, today's orange, and you got to fear everybody, and you got to suspect everybody with a backpack, and everybody's out to get you, right? Just constant anxiety with that. So that is not genetic, right? When you look at suicide rates doubling from 2020 to 2021, so during this whole COVID cycle, not only did you die more likely to die from suicide than COVID in the beginning, but now a whole year later of our 2-week flattening the curve cycle, we now have suicide rates going up by 90 to 100%. We have now doubled the suicide rates. And so there's a price we pay for this. So they sell you the fear, they sell you the anxiety as being American, but there's a price that we pay for that. And most people's price is constant anxiety, constant unhappy, and even to the point where they see no option other than taking their own lives. So we don't want to get to that point. And so we know this is not, we know it's an American thing. We know it's not a genetic thing, because genetics doesn't like increase over time like that, or have sudden epidemics. So then, if we look at that and we say, well, what's the age peaks? So for anxiety, I talk about this all the time with patients. So again, females, the printer did not print very well. So the lighter colors females, and then the darker colors males. And typically right about puberty is where you see it skyrocket. So again, by the time we see our teenagers enter that age, we are stressing the hell out of them, big time, making them super anxious. And the peak time overall is 35 years old. Now, that's an important number, because when I talk to patients all the time about balancing their hormones, 35 is now the age where you can no longer eat your way back to happiness or distract from the sadness. So that is where, like, okay, so people do like wheat and dairy, right? We call those comfort foods. They're comfort foods because they have morphine in them. And the reason things like dairy has morphine in them is because you squeeze a baby out that vagina, it's so strong it misshapens that head, and then it's super traumatic. They spank the baby, cries, fills its lung up with air for the first time, and then the baby's traumatized, so it goes straight to breast, and that's morphine, right? Then baby falls down, oh, morphine. Then the baby have a little hard time sleeping, morphine. And then we become adults and we're like, I want some morphine. Today was kind of hard. So then we become dairy addicts. Cheese has the same effect on your brain as hardcore drugs. But of course, nobody's shaming you and you're not losing your job because you ate some cheese or a whole block of cheese for that point, right? When I was a kid, we got government cheese. It was like a gigantic, huge, gross-ass block of nasty-ass cheese for free from the fire department. So you're not living until you eat some government cheese. And you guys eat government cheese? I was so ashamed of that as a kid. But as an adult, it's just like, whatever. It's fine. Yeah, see, Jessica says she needs some morphine. So bread, same thing. One of the major proteins in bread is morphine, glutenomorphin. So that grilled cheese, that cake and ice cream, the reason you see dairy and bread go together is because it's like meth and crack together, right? So life sucks. I just want some crack. And by 35, we now see that even the sugar that's like crack, that same effect on the brain, the wheat, the dairy, all that morphine, eventually you downregulate your own productions and you can't eat enough wheat and dairy to be happy anymore. And then people end up on antidepressants. And we know that, 70% of those that end up on antidepressants will become more depressed. 70%. Now that's a big difference between what doctors were told in the 1980s, and we're going to talk about that. Because one of the treatment options typically we like to go with, or not we, but is antidepressants. So negative feedback loops in your body. So everything in your body works off negative feedback loops except for birth in a baby and clot in blood, because those both have a very prominent endpoint, right? You don't want to keep clotting and clotting and clotting. That'd be problematic. So if you take something that affects a neurotransmitter and makes your body think you're making more of it, then you make less. And then they up the dose, and then you make less, and they up the dose, and then they add another one on, and then that lowers that, and then they add on one for epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine, and serotonin, and then eventually there's nothing left, and they put you on antipsychotics. So this is a mess. I want to answer a couple questions here. So Melissa, yes, well, all wheat bread, we'll say that. So she said, is it all bread? So just wheat bread. And then, well, all right, I don't know if I have that picture. Actually, I always tell you guys about that morphine, but there is, let me see if I can grab that real quick. There's actually a few more foods that have morphine in them. So those are probably healthier comfort foods. So let's look at the healthier comfort foods here. Let's see if we can find this real quick. And then Michelle says ice cream, cookies and cream. Yeah. Oh, no, Michelle, that's all that. Ice cream is morphine, cookies is morphine, the cream in the cookies and cream is morphine. But actually the cream probably isn't morphine anymore. It's probably just petroleum made to taste like that. So that's just cancer causing. Oh, here we go. Here's our morphine ones. All right, so bioactive peptides in food, and then these are opioid foods. So casomorphin, that's dairy. Lactoferroxins, that's dairy. Caseoxins, that's dairy. And then lactorphins, those are dairy, right? So of this list, The top five things are dairy morphines. Then we have gluteomorphine or gluteomorphin, and so there's one for bread, and there's four. Oh, it's four. Four for dairy. And then eggs have a little bit of morphine in them called ovulin. And then soybeans, so only organic, but they have soy morphins in there. Did you guys know that? Soybeans have morphine in them. And then there's blood serum proteins. That's why vampires love drinking blood, is because it has seromorphin in there. So that's morphine in your blood. So maybe that's why they drink the blood when they kill the deer or something. I don't know. Now, okay, so get this. Spinach has morphine in there. Spinach. Popeye eating spinach, getting super strong, right? He's getting high. That's what's happening. That's why he could get beat up and be okay, because he's high as a kite. So spinach has rubiscolins in there, and that's morphine. Rice has morphine in there. So that's why everybody, this is funny, because this explains a lot, right? So then people are just like, okay, if I have to give up my bread, I'm just going to use tons of rice. So rice has morphine in there. And then red meat has morphine in there. But it's from the blood. So, people eat blood sausage, they're getting high, right? So that's crazy, huh? Those are things I wouldn't think of as morphine. But so then we got milk, bread, eggs, soy, meat, spinach, and rice. That's kind of like the American diet, I think. I think we might just all be food drug addicts, even when we try to eat healthy. That's cray cray. So, I ran across that the other day because I was trying to look up morphine foods for my patient. But okay, so back to neurotransmitters. So, are they a solution or not a solution? When I first started practice, or probably even when I got went to grad school, we learned about negative feedback. We learned about neurotransmitters, and then the move in the 80s was like Prozac came out, and Prozac was a SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And what that means is it blocks the reuptake of serotonin, which then makes it bounce across to the other nerve, and it makes the body have more nerve reactions because of that. Now, they were touting, the drug companies that were selling it, touting like an 80-90% success rate, right? There's also the problem that was coming up, and you saw it on talk shows in the news, people taking Prozac and killing themselves and killing other people. And of course, they were like, that's not true, that doesn't exist. When was it Prozac's patent ran out? So when your patent runs out, then you have to, everybody can make your product generic, right? So then you don't make your billions of dollars. So then you come up with a new patent like XR, like extended release or controlled release. That's why you always see the new like controlled release, and like, well, why didn't they come out with that the first time? Because that's to get them another, I think, 12 years of patent money, right? So to get the new patent for Prozac, they had to show that the new extended release was more beneficial than the old one or safer. And so for decades, they were denying that Prozac led to homicidal or suicidal thoughts. But when they ran out of their patent and they tried to get the new patent for the new Prozac, they said one of the arguments was that it is less likely to cause homicidal and suicidal thoughts like the original Prozac. So the thing they denied for all these years is now their reasoning for buying the new one. That definitely doesn't cause those, right? So I taught anatomy and physiology for 7 years. Like, I taught this stuff, and like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So then there was doctors like us that, we're wearing tinfoil hats and going, hey, that's not how physiology works. You are making things worse. So statistically, research could not reproduce what the pharmaceutical companies were saying that the doctors saw in their office. They had this huge success, but what they found was 70% of people got worse. And that didn't make any sense between that disconnect. So, fast forward to today, and now WebMD, it now says Although it is widely believed that serotonin deficiency plays a role in depression, there has not been any studies proving that brain levels of this or any other neurotransmitter are in short supply when depression or mental illness develops. That's zero evidence in 60 years of research. So now we have the main medical establishments saying it's not SSRIs, it's not a serotonin problem. And that's the messed up thing is like when you teach anatomy and physiology, you're like, only 5% of serotonin is in the brain in the first place. 95% of it's traveling on platelets, and then they go and help make bone and other stuff, right? Which is why studies show that you increase fracture rates when you mess up SSRIs, when you take antidepressants, because then that lowers your serotonin. Then you have less floating on platelets, then you have less making bone, and then they end up having fractures. So hey, we can make your depression better, but probably not. But now you got a bone fracture. Good luck with that. It's a mess. It's a mess. So if we look at New England Journal of Medicine, it says numerous studies of norepinephrine and serotonin metabolites in blood, plasma, urine, and cerebrospinal fluid, as well as post-mortem studies of the brain of patients with depression. And so this is going to be the same for anxiety, just so you know. So we're saying depression, the same thing. But yet has yet to identify any purported deficiencies that are reliable. So none. Even the New England Journal of Medicine says this. So this is a whole list. Now, I used to work in this office where there's a psychiatrist and his wife, who's a nurse practitioner, maybe? I think she might be a nurse practitioner. She got very upset with me when I did a talk on this. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, let's have a talk. I'll show you my research, and then you can tell me why it's wrong, right? Don't tell me I'm wrong. I'm telling you what research shows. So you tell me why the New England Journal of Medicine, why all these medical schools and all these Ivy League institutions, you tell me why they're wrong, right? So then she didn't have the meeting with me. She just gave up. So the Journal of Psychiatry says, failure in treating major depression with SSRIs is common in clinical psychiatry. To date, there is no specific guidelines how to deal with such a failure. And, you know, when I was I'm a chiropractor. I have a DC degree, so I have a doctorate in that. But I also went to medical school. So I practiced under my DC license. I quit medical school to do functional lifestyle medicine. What I do now, because I didn't feel like we're helping anybody. Except for surgery. We chop stuff out. You don't have that problem anymore. But I remember Dr. Moore asked me when I was in my psych rounds at Prairie View, he said, you know, how are you doing in your rounds? What do you think? You know, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, no disrespect, but I feel like we're just kind of saying, let's try this drug. Nope, that didn't work. Let's try this one, double this one. No, okay, let's try this one, and he goes, that's exactly what we're doing. So he was board certified in psychiatry and neurology, and he said we have no earthly idea what the hell we're doing in psychiatry. It's just a gamble. We have no idea why some people benefit and some people don't. So now when we look at literature, it makes a lot more sense with that, right? So the University of Leeds, this dude's name is Adair Pickles. That's the dumbest name ever. Poor guy. Oh, I don't know why that's so funny. This dude's name is Pickles. How are you gonna take a dude's name like he's a scientist? He's up there doing like lectures and his name's Mr. or Dr. Pickles. Dr. Pickles, there's an emergency. I can't do it. I don't know why Okay, so this is the School of Biochemical Science, University of Leeds. It says the monoamine hypothesis was not correct. There was little to no evidence to support the notion that depression is associated with low levels of monoamine, and predictions based on it were not born out of research. None. So MOAIs, the original antidepressants were B12. So people get B12 shots. People would take B12, like methyl B12, sublingual is kind of what you want. But the medicine was like, whoa, that's not standardized. You have no idea how much B12 you might be getting. And so then they came out with MAOIs, right? But MOAIs, as antidepressants, you could double dose and kill yourself. So you take a bunch of depressed people, give them a drug they could double dose and kill themselves. That didn't turn out too well, right? So that's when SSRIs came out, and Prozac was going to be this heaven sent for all these antidepressants because you could take a truckload and not kill yourself. Now, over time, you might want to kill yourself because you're downregulating your own happiness through messing up your hormones, but at least you wouldn't double dose and kill yourself. So it seemed a lot safer. So that monoamine that started this whole thing, that replaced B12, they said it wasn't real. It wasn't born out of research. Kind of like cholesterol being 200. It's not born out of research. 8 doctors came up with that number that were tied to a company that's going to make money from it. So, not weird how this is sometimes? All right, so the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology, that's a big word, in 2010, GSK, Glasgow, Klein, whatever their name is, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Merck, and Sanofi all announced that they had stopped looking for new antidepressants altogether. Apparent that this process had neither worked that well, since the only real improvements over the 60 years of research was a reduction of side effects. That's it. So they are not coming up with new SSRIs because they didn't work at all. Like, all the drug companies gave up now. So that's the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology. The journal Nature says many people affected by mental illness are facing a bleak future as drug companies abandon research because it didn't work. Journal of Primary Psychiatry says clinical trial evidence suggests that 50% of all patients with depression will have partial or no response to adequate trials of antidepressants. The New England Journal of Medicine says clinical frequency adds a second medication to the initial that's ineffective antidepressant drug. No randomized trials have compared the efficacy of such approach. So that's where you see this common thing that happens is you're not doing very well, so I'm going to give you an antidepressant that's not born out of research. It's probably going to make things worse. And when you don't feel that well, I'll just add on another drug. And nobody tested these drugs together. So that's where you end up on Wellbutrin and Effexor and Prozac and so. Time Magazine, it says antidepressants are some of the most prescribed drugs in the world, yet they are also amongst the least understood. We know very little about how effective antidepressants are in the people that take them. Some antidepressants may work fantastically for some people. On the other hand, perhaps all of them may be useless or even worse. The truth is unclear. Medscape says, unfortunately, SSRI therapy is problematic for many. A relapse into depression states during ongoing treatment is common. 75% will relapse. And so that creates an iatrogenic endogenous depletion. We literally guarantee that, was this one, 75? 75% will get worse. Journal of the American Medical Association says SSRIs at best are 33% effective. That's the JAMA. That's the American Medical Association journal. And then MedPage from Columbia and Johns Hopkins University, studies show that doctors routinely prescribe multiple SSRIs and pharmacological drugs in combinations with few, if any, studies to back up multiple use. Doctors are, in essence, performing uncontrolled experiments on the patients. So this is where, like, There was a book called The 100 Million Guinea Pigs, I think, that came out maybe in the 30s, whenever the population was 130 in America. So it was the 100 million guinea pig experiment. And basically what they were saying is, we are just trying out and seeing what happens to people. And so just like this new COVID vaccination, right? So the COVID vaccination, that mRNA has never been used in medical treatment ever. But guess who's being the experimental population? All of us. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, it should be super safe. Honestly, it really should be. It's mRNA, should be fine. Very little extra ingredients in those. A little antifreeze, but you know. So out of all the vaccines, this is the least toxic. But it's one of those things of like, you are the experiment. All you guys that take the vaccine, you are now the experiment. When they came out with swine flu, and swine flu is going to kill all of us a few years ago, they came out with the rush swine flu vaccine, and they were paying parents if they would give their kid this vaccine. The reason they were paying parents is because your kid is now the test subject. That's messed up. So let's see. Let's find something else here. Oh, the POLS medical journal that does meta studies and stuff. They publish a lot of research. A previous study has indicated that the benefits of antidepressants were exaggerated. We talked about that. There's a lot of research that shows this is all this stuff. So, yeah. So, Cardiff University, David Healy, specializes in the use of SSRI drugs, says the latest studies confirm suspicions that the drug's effectiveness has dramatically been overestimated. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the federal investigation found that more than 1 in 5 claims for psychiatric drugs did not comply with federal guidelines prohibiting unnecessary or excessive medication. 1 in 5. Stanford University, more than half of the prescriptions in 2008 were used for uncertain, unspecific evidence. So again, doctors often are prescribing off-label. Often they're prescribing multiple drugs that are untested together, and you are now the guinea pigs. And the FDA says studies show that half of the drug trials had positive results, but 95% of the trials cited published literature was positive. So instead of 50%, they said 94%. So National Health Services of England, adopted cognitive behavioral therapy as first-line treatment for mild to moderate depression because of the risk-benefit ratios, and that the risk-benefit ratio is poor for antidepressants. And then the University of Connecticut, all antidepressants reported in 2010, including all the well-known SSRIs, had no clinically significant benefit over placebo. While in aggregate, antidepressants slightly edge out placebos, and the difference is clinically negligible. So basically, when placebo or hope is more effective, that's a big problem, because there is huge risk of side effects with all these, and you're downregulating your own production of these neurotransmitters. So all of that is just basically saying, look, we know this is an American phenomenon. We know it's through driving things like fear and anxiety and inadequacy. We know it's not genetic, but we also know it's not a neurotransmitter imbalance. So a lot of people, that's their first line, and there's a lot of people that like go to doctors like me that specialize in this stuff, and they'll do tons of neurotransmitter tests because that's the bandwagon that everybody's jumping on. But it's not a neurotransmitter problem. Research is conclusive. In 60 years of research, it is not a neurotransmitter problem. So then if you do get tested and they're like, oh, it's a neurotransmitter problem, it's not. It's not. It's not. So great for selling stuff, but not really helping people long term. So then there becomes what really causes anxiety, right? So we're going to talk on this for this week and next week, right? Because there's a lot of information here. And again, the way that I deal with stuff is, how does the body work? What do we do to mess it up? Teach people to stop messing it up. And we've had anxiety patients that were like, I'm going to kill myself kind of anxiety, to just basic Starbucks white people problems like, they never get my order right, I'm always in the slowest lane of traffic, all these kind of bull crap, like, uh, you know, let's say trauma is trauma, drama is drama, still have the same effect, right? I mean, I've had guns pointed in my face from gangbangers, and that's pretty stressful. I saw someone get fire a gun in a man's face, 11 feet, probably 10 feet from me, maybe 15 feet. That's real trauma. But people that have, like my daughters, when they don't feel heard, or they feel like, I'm kind of like desensitized or invalidating to their feelings when they get hurt, that's trauma, right? And so I can't be like, well, you all don't know trauma because I've been through real trauma. It's still trauma, and it still has a neurological effect on the brain. So we don't want to discount any trauma in this, but most people's trauma is just general anxiety disorder. It's just kind of like, I don't want to say self-inflicted, but it is. It's American. It is our culture. It is the way that we create people in the U.S. So I always say, well, let's look at the things that we know cause this problem. And can we change those things? And if we change those things, does you go back to normal? Do you go back to normal? And for 17 years, it has been extremely easy to get most people back to where they need to be, because your body's designed to be happy. Your physiology is designed to be happy. Your genetics are designed to be happy. But our culture is not. Our diet is not. So let's talk about a couple things, and then we'll close out today. And the next week we'll talk about some more detailed kind of stuff. So we might look at like a little bit of genetics. There's some genetics that matter. There's some that doesn't. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about histamines. So not the histamines in the food that you eat, but the histamines that your T cells produce in an inflammatory reaction that causes things like anxiety. So we'll talk about that. So to finish out today, let's talk about 2 dietary things that absolutely cause anxiety. Like, we can induce anxiety on and off with this, okay? So the first thing is blood sugar. Now, Americans, we consume about 150 pounds of added sugar to our diet every year. 150 pounds. Guess how much sugar that we had before the 1800s added to our diet? 0. So we didn't import sugar, and then we started importing sugar. And then all of a sudden, by the 1910, we ate 10 pounds of sugar a year added to our food. This is not fruit. Fruit is healthy. Fruit is low glycemic. Fruit reverses obesity, reverses diabetes. Ain't nobody got fat or diabetic from eating cantaloupes that are medium to high glycemic. Okay? No one did. No one got fat eating raisins. We got fat because we ate 150 pounds of added sugar to our diet, and then we blame oranges or grapes or bananas. It's ridiculous. So by 1940, we started adding about 140, 150 pounds of added sugar. So in 1910, it was 10 pounds. 10 pounds. 20 of those little half-pound bags. By 1940, we were adding 280, can that be right, of those little half-pound bags. That's crazy. But if you look at most food, it'll say sugar on that list, but it'll show a bunch of other food that becomes sugar. So maltodextrin, dextrose, glucose, those are maltose, those are all sugar. But they don't get to count them, so you don't even expect that they're in there. But it's still going to have an effect on you. So with that, we created type 2 diabetes. We created sugar diabetes. In 2010, we created type 3 diabetes, which is brain diabetes, which is dementia, brain fog, and all this kind of stuff. It mimics Alzheimer's, but it's just your diet. You cannot eat that much sugar and not expect to get a sugar storage disease, right? That easy to reverse diabetes. Super easy to reverse diabetes. But you have to understand how it works, what you do to mess it up, and then practice, teach people not to mess it up. So we ended up actually creating more obese Americans than overweight Americans for the first time in history. We did it. We're the best, right? More obese than overweight. Think about that. There are more people that are medically obese than just overweight now. That's what happens when you do this, right? But psychologically, sugar's more addictive than crack cocaine, so you're just a drug addict anyways, right? But does that sugar cause anxiety? So, years ago, I taught this 36-hour postdoctoral program on functional approaches to endocrinology. I made this little chart. I'm going to show you my chart. So, this is how you create anxiety with your American diet. So you have a range for blood sugar that's normal. It kind of waxes and wanes like it's supposed to. And then you have high glycemia that's too high, low glycemia is too low, and your body's supposed to just kind of have a nice little rhythm to it, right? So if we eat like an American right here, and we say, I'm going to eat cereal, which is sugar, I'm going to eat, they have sugar in the cereal, the dairy is sugar, the toast is sugar, the jam is sugar, the orange juice is sugar. So I just ate sugar, 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 and now my blood sugar spikes way too high. So I overproduce insulin and drop it way too low. Now this is the thing where people are like, well, I'm low glycemic, I get all shaky. You're not low glycemic, you're reactive hypoglycemic because you're hyperglycemic. You just ate too much sugar and the body's overproducing insulin. And so when it overproduces, it drops it too low and suddenly you can't function. And then the body says, how are we going to raise blood sugar back up to normal without more sugar? And so the body uses epinephrine. Epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol. That's your fight or flight. Now, growth hormone's in there too, because that's why you end up with skin tags and polyps and stuff, right? Breasts start growing, you have endometriosis and other things, but that's beside the point. That's a different discussion. But that high glycemic diet, that American healthy, has the American Heart Association on their approval, that should cause you to drop down into hypoglycemia, and then your body will use epinephrine, norepinephrine to drive blood sugar back up through the liver without more added sugar from your diet. So then you should have anxiety. All of a sudden, I need to fight or flight, but all I do is eat breakfast. Why am I starting to feel a little antsy, right? Well, I'm probably hypoglycemic. Why don't I go ahead and hit that Snickers up real quick, right? Maybe toss in a Gatorade because I got that deep down body thirst. And then we just go hyperglycemic, hypo, anxiety. Hypoglycemic, hypo, anxiety. And we literally eat and drink ourselves into anxiety every single meal, every single snack as Americans. Forget about all the other fear. Forget about all the other stuff we've talked about. We literally can just eat a balanced, healthy American diet and cause constant general anxiety disorder. And then when you keep eating like that and you get tired of feeling anxious, you go to your doctor and they say, no problem, we'll just put you on antidepressants, which don't work, and it's not an antidepressant problem. And so then 70% of those people get worse, and as they get worse, they feel more awful, so they want to cope more. So let's do more wheat, which is sugar. All bread is sugar bound to oxygen, bound to sugar, bound to oxygen, bound to sugar, bound to oxygen. Now, that means a loaf of Wonder Bread is 100% sugar. 100% sugar. But if you get whole grain, well, at least the fiber absorbs 80% sugar, not your bloodstream. That goes to your gut bacteria if you haven't killed it off. That gut bacteria then eats that as fructooligosaccharides. That's called prebiotics. It then makes butyrate, which is now one of the most up-and-coming chemotherapeutics there are. You just make it for free. And it also makes B vitamins. And now you're just dumping out B vitamins so you can be healthy and happy and energetic, and your sleep, your amino acids that lead to sleep, which we'll talk about, they're all full. The ones that make PEA for mood, the ones that make your thyroid, man, they're all awesome. All those precursor B vitamins then make every other neurotransmitter system in your body work better. And you get to be happy and healthy and energetic, right? But if you take the fiber out, well, now you have anxiety. Now you have real problems, right? So you can literally eat and drink your body into anxiety. The amount of sugar that's in a soda, just a can, 16 teaspoons. Think about that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. My arm would get tired making my own soda, right? That's why with Kool-Aid, I just get the cup out. Poof, right? What's wrong with that? So 16 teaspoons, but before the 1800s, it was no teaspoons of sugar, right? So we are doing a fabulous experiment, mostly on Americans, mostly recently, because we've never done this before. We have never eaten this much sugar ever in the history of mankind. If you ate a sugar cane, you would have lower blood sugar than American diet because it is solid fiber. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one. I have had one in my office there for a while, but it's all dense, right? You can eat the sugar cane and still have lower glycemic than just eating like an American. So these are things we can control. These are absolute knowns that we know cause anxiety and depression. We know this, but no one applies it because the majority of doctors have about only 6% of doctors have any nutrition classes, let alone clinical nutrition. And of the clinical nutrition, even docs like me, it's not really how to change your diet and your food. It's more of, well, just take vanadium chromium and keep eating crap. So, oh snap, we're out of time. All right. So we'll stop there. We'll talk about how to drink your way into anxiety. We'll talk about the genetics that is a problem versus the genetics that isn't a problem. We'll talk about how we can get our immune system to dump histamines to make us anxious all the time and what we can actually do about that. So it might seem like what we talk about is overwhelming in the beginning, right? I mean, the stuff we put our patients through, it's not easy. It's doable. They're going to be happy. But your body wants to be happy. Your body wants to not be anxious. It doesn't want to be depressed. So we have to talk about how it works, what we do to mess it up, and teach you to stop messing it up. So when we look at diet from now on, and you think about, am I eating my way into anxiety? Or am I eating my way into happiness? These are the things we got to start thinking about, because it's way cheaper to not cause problems. And then the solutions end up causing problems to be extremely worse, for only 70%. So, all right. I know this is a heavy subject for a lot of people. I know a lot of people don't even know they have anxiety They just have coped really well with it. But being at peace is way better. It doesn't mean that you'll have to be perfect. It just means I know when I feel anxious, what did I just do? Oh yeah, I should probably feel a little anxious. Okay, reel it back in, right? It gives you so much more control over your own happiness, your own stress, your own responses when you know this stuff. You are empowered to be happy and healthy and balanced. So, hope you guys enjoyed this. And thank you, Adiva. So, I'm going to go have martinis and listen to karaoke. And my friends sing. I don't sing because I'm horrible. And everybody says they're horrible. And then I went up there and I came back and I was like, well, and they're like, yeah, you should not sing karaoke. Like, it's not even like, oh, he tried. It's just like, that was a goddamn train wreck. It was terrible. I'm the kind of guy that sings in church and people turn around like, Jesus asked you to stop. Could you just hum maybe? Just hum. So, I don't know. Even my daughter, she said, maybe if you took voice lessons, Dad, like you wouldn't sing so bad. So I don't know. I don't know. All right. Uh, keep me posted, you guys. Let me know if you have questions. I know a lot of you guys watch this off the air, but post questions too, and I'll try to get those answered. Next week we'll have your questions available too, since it's live. And next week we'll be back on Tuesday. We had technical difficulties yesterday, so I had to go to George's, and we ate dessert and drank coffee instead because of the technical difficulties. So, doesn't work. Go be happy, right? So, sorry about having this a day late for you guys, but love you guys. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. This is episode 188, and next week we'll talk more about anxiety, and then we'll do a couple on depression. Love to hear your stories. Love to hear your solutions, things that you found that were very helpful for you. All right? Bye, guys.